Hey, welcome back to the CineFiles. Today's topic is going to be SNL-inspired movies. The movies that featured the then current cast stars of Saturday Night Live. But before we get into that, here are my co-hosts. We have Mr. Andre Joseph, Mr. Jeff Galashaw, and I'm Eric Cohen. And let's get into the conversation. Now, you came up with the topic.
Yes.
Why? What interests you about like Saturday Night Live and the films that were inspired from
Well,
it?
I mean, Saturday Night Live, most people know by now, is like an institution. Everybody knows about it. And a lot of, I guess what you would say, comedic superstars came from it. But if you actually look at it over the years, there's only really about a handful of movies that have been inspired from actual skits.
There were a lot of films that came out that were meant to be, prop up the actors or the comedians from Saturday Night Live and make them stars, but they weren't technically Saturday Night Live films.
Exactly.
In fact, and what confused things even further, some of these films starring these actors, comedians, whatever, were also produced by Lorne Michaels, even though they didn't feature Saturday Night Live properties. Right?
Exactly.
Lorne Michaels from Canada. Started with Second City.
Yes.
Was a successful television producer in Canada. Came to America and started producing TV there, and came up with the idea of doing a sort of sketch comedy show that hadn't been seen before up to that point. That would be strictly American based and pulling a lot of comedians and improv artists out of like Second City, Chicago, and out of Canada, and bring them into this new format. It was very unique for its time. The closest thing anyone had seen to that might have been Second City TV, right? Some people even cite Monty Python as being a direct influence on Saturday Night Live, although Saturday Night Live was more immediate, more freewheeling, more, in the moment. But yeah, it premiered, when did it premiere? Around 76?
1975.
75. The very first host was George Carlin, if I'm not to be mistaken. And it became a legendary success that still runs to this day. Probably the longest running TV series, technically.
Probably,
Yeah, it's up there.
I mean, that's not the Tonight Show, Although it's continued to be incredibly successful, from a critical standpoint, it's gone through its bad seasons.
Of course.
And it's gone through its like long periods of just not as funny as it used to be.
And even Lorne Michaels had left the show for a little while.
He left the show for a while and came back. That was the dark period.
Well, where really Eddie Murphy was
Eddie
really
Murphy
the
era,
only
right.
savior
Right.
of the show.
Probably the first Saturday Night Live movie was the Blues Brothers. And Blues Brothers were characters created by John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd. It wasn't really a skit comedy act, actually, which I think is really interesting.
It was like a musical guest.
It was. They were kind of like, that was kind of like their Spinal Tap before there was a Spinal Tap. They were a mock blues band. And they would just go up to their thing and they would perform it, and they took it very seriously. And they decided to turn it into a movie.
They recorded albums before the movie.
Yeah. Their live performance, what was it, A Briefcase Full of Soul? The live performance was released as an album. And
I fucking love the Blues Brothers.
Oh, it's fantastic.
It may be next to something like Wayne's World the best film to be spin off of Saturday Night Live characters.
exactly.
It's just complete anarchy. It's hilarious. John Landis does an exceptional job directing it.
The one movie, or one of the few movies Steven Spielberg has ever acted in, even if it is a cameo.
It's very much a cameo. He only has like a word, let alone a sentence.
He's a very important character.
It is very
But yeah,
and it could also be seen as a musical too. And
it is a musical. I totally say I absolutely consider it a musical.
Unfortunately, it was followed by a very unfunny sequel.
Well, the sequel was terrible.
But that's another story for another.
Yeah, we can get into that because that is a Saturday Night Live property, but it's terrible. But the Blues Brothers, was there any attempt to do any other? Like, there was no attempt to do like John Belushi's samurai character as a movie or anything.
Nor the Killer Bees, thank God.
Right, but
unfortunately, years later,
the Coneheads.
Exactly, decades later, they've decided let's go and do the Coneheads.
Well, wait a minute. Let's go back. We still got to spend some time with Blues Brothers.
Well, you asked. I'm just answering the question.
Yeah, let's go back to Blues Brothers. Blues Brothers is an incredibly funny movie. I mean,
no arguments here.
You know, the car chase through Chicago towards the end.
Oh my God,
it's fantastic. Mike Foltz isn't with us for the shoot. He and I would over and over again say this quote: orange whip, 2 orange whips. You know, John Candy, fantastic in it. Great cast. Carrie Fisher,
Henry Gibson.
Oh, the Nazi.
Yes.
Yeah, Henry Gibson's awesome in it. Henry Gibson's really good.
They actually let Ray Charles act in the film. He's really, other than Aretha Franklin, one of the only musical acts who actually gets to act.
Cab Calloway.
Yes, Cab Calloway.
Cab Calloway does a great rendition of Minnie the Moocher.
Early performance by Paul Rubens before he became Pee-wee.
That's right. Very early performance.
That great dinner scene, which I thought, Belushi really sold the hell out of that. I want to buy your twin.
Yeah.
How much for the little girl?
Yeah, I have great love for the Blues Brothers, and it was an expensive movie to make.
Oh, it was epic.
Yeah, in fact, it went way over budget, and they're afraid they weren't going to recoup their costs.
Yeah, so they thought it was going to fail because all the car chases, and they were even against some of the musical acts because a lot of those guys didn't have hits in years, so they wanted to get Rolls Royce or some more current act at that time. But that actually brought Aretha Franklin and Ray Charles back, if anything.
Yeah. It was like a night and day to the sequel. Because we should get into the sequel, because that is Saturday Night Live property. Yeah. We might as well just get it out of the way. I mean,
John Belushi's.
It should not have been made because John Belushi couldn't be in it. What's the point of having a Blues Brothers movie without Elwood Blues?
It obviously was more of a cash in.
But it was like a sad old person's idea of what a sequel. I mean, I mean this. It wasn't funny. It wasn't subversive. It was downright stupid in parts. A whole fantasy element.
I didn't even understand what John Goodman's role really was in this, other than be a big guy next to Dan Aykroyd.
John Goodman's part was completely unnecessary.
And, you also have the cute kid brought in.
Yeah, the son, whatever. That was terrible.
I know Landis stated in interviews he was kind of under studio pressure a lot with bringing in the kid, bringing in Joe Morton. They want a black blues brother in there. I think it was really more Dan Aykroyd who wanted it more than anything.
Yeah,
he was like, it's all about the music, right? I mean, the only redeeming value is the musical numbers. I think.
Yeah, for the
most part. The soundtrack is really good, but
it's a decent soundtrack. But again, it just doesn't come off. It comes off as if they're trying really hard to make up for everything else.
Yeah, after the magic
and you just see it and you feel it, and it just feels awkward.
They replaced the Nazis with the Russian mob.
The first one, there was a charm. It felt rough. It felt raw. It was kind of sloppy in its presentation. Yeah. That's what made it work. That's why, getting back to the subject of Saturday Night Live, a lot of people, if you look back in the older episodes, that's why the older episodes, the original Saturday Night Lives, are the first couple of decades, or whatever, first decade, again. There was a rawness, roughness, things could go wrong, feel to it. And then it got this thing where it became more and more elaborate, where makeup became more elaborate. You had to look like the person you were impersonating. Whereas in the old days, Chevy Chase played Gerald Ford, he didn't wear makeup, right. Stuff like that. And it just felt like it's a good metaphor for the sequel to the Blues Brothers, where they're just trying so hard with all these things. It's just, just don't bother. Don't do a Blues Brothers sequel without Elroy.
Elwood was Dan Aykroyd.
No, Elwood, sorry. That's it. No, Elwood? I thght he was Jake.
No, Jake is John
I stand corrected. Never mind.